We are, I believe, live. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. If you're watching here on the West Coast or afternoon on the East Coast or whatever time zone you're watching this from, either live or in person or after the fact, this is our fourth installment of the composing and arranging workshop with the great trombonist and musician and writer and arranger and man about town, Dave Marriott. Dave, thank you for joining us again. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, great to be here again. We've done a bunch of these and a bunch of concerts.
Yeah. Well, we just did a
Blast.
concert on Sunday. Normally, as I was mentioned on the concert on Sunday, we do the workshop first, and then we play the music. This one, just because of the way the schedule worked out, we played the music first, and then we'll talk about stuff that we did for the concert here.
Mm-hmm.
And for those, if you're new to this, if this is the first one that you've seen or are watching, as I mentioned, this is number 4. So there are 3 more. They're all on our YouTube page, YouTube channel. You can go watch those, and if you have questions after the fact, feel free to put them in the comments or email, and we can certainly get to those. So, David, that being said, what would you like to start with today?
Well, last time we talked a little bit about the compositional part of arranging, kind of, the idea that once you've written your tune, the next sort of step in arranging, beyond composing is figuring out, the form of your tune and maybe adding an introduction and an outro and backgrounds and all those sorts of things. We talked a lot about, structural form kinds of oriented stuff. And I felt like today it might be kind of fun to just talk a little bit about a little more of the nitty gritty parts of what make something sound like an arrangement right out of the gate. We do a lot of these concerts where we're just bringing in tunes for the first time, right? We're trying out a new tune. It's as Kareem describes it. These concerts are kind of like a composer's workshop. They're an opportunity for us as the guests, as well as Kareem, to come in and try out some new tunes and see what it feels like to blow on them, see what it feels like to play them, and also figure out how to make it feel less like a jam session, beyond that performance. Because that's ostensibly, that's kind of how we end up playing a lot of these tunes, right? The same way you would play it at a jam session. You try to come up with something to blend with the melody. If you're not playing the melody proper, you're trying to figure out ways to complement that with harmony that makes sense. Again, if there's an F chord and the melody has an F, then don't play the C to go with it. Little things like seek strong notes. And it's not even always. I was thinking about the tune of yours that we started with, the 1 and 3. Was some Puget something, I can't remember what it was, or something.
Going far.
Puget Creek, or is that? Oh, I was thinking this. I'm thinking of the ballad. But the nice like little up thing in 3. The changes were like F to E flat to D flat to E flat. Thousands of tunes that do that kind of thing.
Yep.
But the melody was really sustained, right? Boo doo dee doo dee, chord changes, chord changes, chord changes.
Yeah.
Boo doo dee doo dee, chord changes, chord changes, chord changes.
Yeah.
And so, certainly as it's composed, it's unison. We would, if we're reading the chart, if we're going to just play it as if it was a written part for us, then we would play it as written, right? But that's not what a lead sheet is. At the end of the day, a lead sheet's not a part. It's not your part. It's a guide for how to make your part.
Yeah.
And I think that's always something that gets sort of lost in the usage of lead sheets. No, it's not the part for everybody. It is the guide for everybody. And everybody is supposed to use this and be creative from it. We've all been to jam sessions or taught workshops with students where they all go up to play a standard and they all pull out the real book and they all play da 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 da, and you're like, what are you doing? Like, nobody does that. Have you heard people actually play jazz music? No one actually does that. And yet that same mechanism is what we tend to do when it's new music and it's getting played for the first time and all those things.
Yeah.
So that's a long-winded setup for our discussion today to say, okay, so if that's not what we're supposed to do, then what are we supposed to do when we're presented with those things? I think in our situation, it's different because, for example, I bet, you're not often the lead voice when you're a sideman,
Right.
right? As a tenor player. When you're the band leader, you're the lead voice.
Right.
It's your band. It's the same goes for me. More often than not, I work as a sideman and I'm not the lead voice. I'm not, I played for years with my brother as a trumpet. So trumpet, trombone, definitely not the lead for me.
Yeah.
So, and when I play with you, it's the same situation. Like you're the trumpet player, you're the lead, and I'm supposed to guide to that. So I always feel like, uh, especially when it comes to like signaling or telegraphing the sense of an arrangement, the first thing you can do is, well, how can you make it not be what the lead player is playing?
Yeah.
Right? The simplest of questions of that. And I feel like the tune always dictates where that works, right?
Yeah.
In that tune of yours that we're talking about, that starts the concert, it's kind of like a long 16 bar A,
Yeah.
and then this like 12 bar bridge, and then another like A. Um, so there's a lot of opportunity to try out variations, right?
Mhm.
You've got a melody that's arguably like a 4 bar phrase 4 times, and then that happens 4 times again, and then another 2 times. So there's 10 times to harmonize a particular phrase
Yeah.
on the head in.
Right.
So split the difference. Why not do let the first 4 repetitions be unison? Why not let the second 4 repetitions have some sense of harmony? Let the bridge speak for itself as a point of contrast, and
Yeah.
let the last A split the difference again. So now we get this sense of balance where it feels like it was intentional, right? I
Yeah.
think that's always, uh, those are the things that always lead to it sounding arranged, is
Right.
if the way that it is played feels intentional. When you hear a bass line out front, right? The minute you hear somebody go boom, 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 like a figure,
Yeah.
it feels more arranged than if somebody just plays bass notes
Right.
and tries to play through those changes, even though they're repetitive and cyclical and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Um, I feel like, especially when we're doing these concerts, the goal to me is always to make it feel like a concert and not a reading session, right?
Right.
Which is hard because we play these concerts in a basement and there's instrument cases everywhere, and it feels like a rehearsal. Like
Yeah.
the room feels like a rehearsal. So how do you take it out of feeling like that?
Yeah.
Again, to me, it's how do I find a thing to do on the melody from a harmonic standpoint that also complements the melody. So in this particular example, uh, the changes are all moving by by whole step.
Hmm.
So it's great. You can just pick a note and start moving by whole step, and you're going to be parallel with the changes. It doesn't really matter where you start in that example, right? You could pick, well, it's F to E flat to D flat. So let's say I start on the G. So I'm playing a G in the melody. I could go G to F to E flat, and now I'm playing nines of everything.
Yeah.
I could,
Right.
it doesn't matter where you start,
Right.
but that sense of motion is so critical because, and again, let's go back to our particular situation. There's no piano,
Right.
right? It's the most problematic thing about the concerts we do. There's no piano, so as a listener, there's no sense of harmony.
Right.
Uh, the only harmony that's getting created is the between the melody and the bass.
Right.
And that's not so much a sense of harmony as it is just an interval,
Yeah.
right? That the minute the second horn plays a different note from the bass and the melody, we now have 3 notes. Now we really do hear harmony.
Right.
So as much as I can do that in real time while we're playing or scoping it out before we play, um, that's the first thing that I'm gonna want to do.
Yeah.
Right. What
It's
about you?
interesting. Well, I mean, it's interesting, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this. You look at, and I was just talking to some students about this the other day. You look at like Sonny Rollins's trios. There's a lot of these trios where it's just bass, drums, and horns. So, I mean, for older examples, You've got, of course, Jerry Mulligan, Chet Baker. You've got the Sonny Rollins. There's the Freedom Suite, East Broadway Rundown, Night at the Village Vanguard. There's a bunch of Branford Marsalis albums like that. Joshua Redman,
Yeah.
Joe Henderson, State of the Tenor, a bunch of these things,
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see, since we're talking about composing and arranging, how they come up with these things. And I was talking about, comping in that situation. I think the first time I heard the Village Vanguard with Sonny Rollins and his trio, Sonny's soloing, and then all of a sudden I'm like, man, I really don't like this solo. The first time I heard it, like I don't really get what's going on. Later on, I realized, oh, he's comping for the bass solo, but he's doing it with his horn, with a single note. So I guess, in the format where there's maybe, or just a single soloist playing a cappella, like there's a bunch of solo horn stuff, like
well, and the thing to remember too, especially about the Chet stuff, is that like those things were highly arranged.
Yes,
like they were highly written out, and
right,
and so they accounted for there being no piano. They were like, there's no piano, so we have to make harmony. So almost all those melodies of those classic Chet and Jerry Mulligan tunes, they're in thirds, they're in some kind of harmony that fills the sound in the band. The flip side of that too is when it's just trio, when it's Sonny and Elvin and Wilbur Ware, or when it's Branford and Tane and Bob Hurst,
or like Fly with Mark Turner and Larry Grenadier and those guys.
Those guys play different than when they play in quartet. I've had long conversations with Tane about playing with Branford in quartet versus playing in trio.
Yes, and so that's what I want to dig into.
And a lot of people, the flip side of this is people don't do that anymore. At least not the people we play with. They play the same in a quartet or a trio or in a big band or in a septet. And it's the way they play. And that's not the job that we choose to do. The job is to play the gig. And if the gig is to play is a trio and there's no piano, then everybody needs to be involved with these things that we're talking about. Everybody needs to be making things busier so it doesn't feel so empty. Everybody needs to be more harmonic. Everybody needs to outline the form. Everybody, right? All of these things have to happen.
I had this conversation with
they're the things that get frustrating on these gigs, right?
Right. And so like I'll do gigs where I play solo saxophone. I've done it, or duo with piano and sax, or drums and sax, or bass and sax, or trio, all the formats. And the thing is, partly just from listening to all these albums and playing a lot of these situations, like I hear things differently based on what's going on in the instrumentation at the time. And I think a lot of people, maybe like you're saying, don't really think about that, but it's true. You have to play, like you could not approach, if you were playing a solo saxophone gig, and again, these are just my opinions, but if you were going to do like a cappella, you can't approach it like Late Train. You have to approach it more like Jerry Mulligan and outline the harmony. Otherwise, the listener has no idea what the heck is going on. And that's talking about
that's back to who's your audience, right?
Right, exactly.
With the sophisticated. If you're playing at fucking huge big jazz festival in Germany and free avant-garde jazz is like the thing, then you're gonna be fine playing Anthony Braxton solo saxophone style. But yes, around here, around these parts, you better come with something familiar, or connectable. I mean, I think that's the other thing. It doesn't really. I don't think it's the what you play ever. I think you could go up there and be just as convincing playing a set of Michael Jackson pop tunes as playing Hungarian folk tunes, as playing standards or whatever. I mean, I don't think I've always stated, and whether I'm teaching in a college program or doing something like this, I've always said that my belief and maybe this is controversial, but the jazz is not a genre of music. It's a way of playing music. It's an approach to playing music.
Totally.
It isn't a style of music, because jazz music encompasses all other styles of music. So it isn't about, oh, I play jazz as opposed to other things. And so I feel like that really comes back to the core of knowing your audience and knowing what the gig is and all of those sorts of things. That there's a large reason that we do a lot of contrafacts on these concerts on Sundays. It's because the changes are familiar to the average jazz listener. And so even though we're writing new melodies, the harmonies and the sense of direction of the tunes and the way we're playing the tunes is fairly traditional and fairly accessible to a non-jazz listener.
Yeah.
That's an important consideration if that's who you're playing for.
Yeah.
And as an arranger and composer, those are important things too. Uh, there needs to be that sense of all of the things of jazz that grab the listener when they're hearing you, if especially if it's a casual listening situation, which are again are not my favorite because that's you aren't the focus.
Right.
That's background music as opposed to a concert.
Yeah.
So if I can say to myself, well, hey, this is an audience that isn't maybe sophisticated, that it hasn't listened to the craziest, weirdest stuff that I have. Uh, if I'm going to play that way, how do I make it so that they're with me when I do it?
Yeah.
And I think that's something that as composers and arrangers, we do a lot. I know for my septet record, Septology in the beginning, this was a really big consideration for me because as much as I was interested in traditional, more sounds in that record, there's a lot of Duke Ellington, a lot of Mingus, a lot of Wynton Marsalis septet influence in those sounds. I knew that I was also at a place in my life and career where I wanted to be exploring more avant-garde sounds. I love the stuff in the 60s with Archie Shepp and Roswell Rudd and the late train things and
Yeah.
ACM and Art Ensemble Chicago and all kinds of stuff. But I also knew I'd be doing this performance at Tula's,
Yeah.
and it would be played at Tula's and Jazz Alley in Seattle. And so I had what did I do? Well, I saved the weird stuff for the end.
Yeah.
I saved the weird stuff for the later movements. I got the audience on board in the early movements. There's a blues and the rhythm changes and like some very palatable, connectable kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
And that as we get towards the creation of man, it's just a giant. I mean, there's like 3 minutes of just fully free playing on there on that day of creation. So it is exactly to me the same when we're reading off a lead sheet and it's two horns and bass and drums.
Yeah.
How do I also over the course of that set, or maybe just my solo, or maybe just the arc of the arrangement itself, do all of those things that I need to communicate? So again, if it's two heads in and two heads out, maybe this you save whatever it is you're going to do for that second head if it's a short head.
Yeah.
One of the tunes that I've been really kind of massaging on these gigs is called Getting Better.
Yeah.
And it's a contrafact on Beatrice, which is not like a particularly super well-known it's not really a standard. It's a jazz classic, I think is probably a better term, by Sam Rivers. But they're real friendly changes, and I've always liked playing them. I played the tune in my band for years. But finding a way to make it readable on paper on the first time and still sound like an arrangement has taken a couple of times, right? To where it felt like, no, that's like when we played it Sunday, I was like, oh yeah, that feels complete for the first time, even though it may be the third time we've played it on a gig in the last 6 months.
Right.
And I really do feel like that was because of a little bit of attention to detail with, oh, you know what? I'm going to take my melody part and I'm just going to make a variation on it that has some harmony.
Yeah.
That isn't all harmony, but is in at least enough places to feel like, again, that word intentional, that I meant to put them in those places.
Right.
So that it's a little more like the melody is in unison and then it goes to harmony for a second and then it stays in harmony, then it's not harmony and then back to unison and then back to unison for two bars and then into some harmony for 2 bars and then the last 4-bar phrase is in harmony. Yeah. So it didn't take more than about 8 minutes of prep time to do that, but boy, does it make a difference in the performance. Right. It went from sounding like a tune that we were scuffling to play together on the first time as a melody to it sounded like we've been playing it for months. The last gig. Mm-hmm. And that's not because I don't think we were any more familiar with it.
Right.
The
Right.
changes didn't get more familiar.
Well, and if I remember, I think the first time you brought it in, it was just the head, and
just the head.
it was just the head. And so then the next time there was the I think there was a harmonized part, and then I
the
think the
shout.
time after that, then it was the shout chorus. Yeah.
Keep trying to add to it to also work with these classes, right? Because we've talked, these are all things that we talked about with the classes.
Right.
In a way, in an effort to kind of go, okay, well, if this is where you are in your process, this is how to get you to the next level.
Yeah.
So some practical practice stuff. Put on a play along that you like, or put on a quartet record that you like, and try to play the melody with the melody player, and then deviate, then accompany, right?
Yeah.
figure out those things that allow you to deviate away from the melody. Where does it fit in the phrasing that it makes sense? Let's pick an example. What's a standard you really like, Kareem?
Oh, geez. Right now I'm working on These Foolish Things.
These Foolish Things. Okay, great. There's like our first two bar phrases, right? And then that's our A. Okay.
Yep.
If you and I were gonna play that together, and I'm gonna guess we're gonna do it as a ballad, yeah.
Sure.
Rather than like 1, 2, 3, 4, it's not going to be like walking, swinging kind of.
Yeah, I was listening to the Monk version. He kind of gets going on that,
Yeah, yeah, very 1930s at that point. But again, if you're playing the melody, and I know you're going to be playing the melody all the way through, I'm especially if it's a ballad, I'm going to assume you're probably not going to play it as rhythmically as I just sang it. Right? So my odds of playing that melody with you properly, rhythmically, are pretty low.
Yeah.
So probably don't want to do that at all. Like, not even attempt to do that at all on a melody like that at that tempo, because I really can't. I won't make it sound better by trying to ghost you. Like trying to hear your phrasing and interpolate all that. It's not going to happen. Yeah. So my gut reaction would be to let you do the first A by yourself, and then fill in on the second A, right? Just little moments to help dovetail in and out of the melody.
Yeah.
It could be as simple as, guide tones and things like that. That stuff's that's boring to me. Like that, that now it feels like there should be 3 other horns and they should all be doing that. And that would be what the intention is. Right. So finding that balance between your choice and what it's supposed to sound like is tough to me. Right. Whereas the guide tones and half notes or donuts, whatever you want to call them, is sort of a default approach on as a second horn player in an accompaniment situation.
Right.
And yet it always sounds bizarre to me. Mm-hmm. It sounds out of character. It sounds like there's something missing. What's At Last? I play At Last. I'm sure you've played At Last more than a few times on some gigs with singers.
Yeah.
I played it not that long ago, and I have written a nice little 3-horn version of this. It's strings on the record. Yeah. But a nice little 3-horn version of all of the all that stuff, and then all of the string stuff that happens during the melody.
Right.
And we played it once, and I think the tenor player just decided to take it upon themselves to double the trumpet, which has all of that stuff. Meanwhile, the other horns are playing like pads underneath that, right? Couple of harmony notes here, and then our melody up here throughout. Well, now it's just me playing half notes, and it sounded awful. It sounded like everything was gone. It would have been better if neither of them had played the melody stuff, and just played donuts with me.
Right.
Then the fact that it got re-emphasized. right?
Sure.
So I feel like this is the example of like, yeah, well, that might be the textbook answer of what you should do, but it sure doesn't sound very good.
Right.
It
Right.
just feels like you threw some stuff in to fill up the space for no actual musical reason.
Right. Right.
Um, especially if there's piano, like piano is going to be covering all of that kind of stuff, right?
That's what I was gonna ask you. So like when then I've seen this a lot, and sometimes there's the I might be playing quartet or quintet or whatever, and it's like, well, they say, okay, go ahead and fill behind, but then you fill, and then well, the piano player's filling, and if the piano player's filling, then I'm just
Yeah.
gonna stay out of the way, you know.
Yes. Yes.
So
And which is what, again, you know, piano players are finicky folk, having been one myself, uh, at different times in my career, and I know you play some piano as well on
sure,
gigs.
sure, yeah,
Uh, I feel like for the most part, and I'm gonna make some piano players mad, but
do
I
it
feel
there.
I feel like most piano players do an awesome job when it's their solo of being involved with the rhythm section and trying to communicate and figure out what's going on.
Yeah,
And I feel like a lot of them don't do that very well when it's your solo,
yep,
when it's a horn player solo.
yep,
Um, there was a time when piano players worked really hard on their comping skills first and not their soloing skills first.
mm,
Uh, I remember being in college, Mark Seals was really, really big on that. He was like, I remember him saying, I don't know if he said it about himself or maybe I heard someone say about him, but he was the house pianist at Jazz Alley for years.
yeah,
And I always, he's such a self-deprecating dude, especially in those days, 20 years ago.
yeah,
Um, but I always felt like, and I think, again, I think somebody just must have said, yeah, but it's because he's trying to be involved in the right way every time.
yeah,
He's actively accompanying.
yes,
And I always feel like that's where maybe a little discussion is super helpful. Like, especially if there's piano and multiple horns, like
yeah,
how do you balance those things?
yeah.
Is
Well, I
it
mean, it's also
is it
right,
artatum fills and things like that?
yeah,
Because if it is, I'm unnecessary. I'm just gonna get the heck out of the way. You're
right,
absolutely right. Or I'm now stuck having to play something very pedantic
yeah,
so that I'm not getting in the way of the piano player doing all of those things.
right,
And now my role is getting diminished because the piano player isn't letting me have some space.
sure,
Um, and I think again, it's that question of does something does something need to happen? And some people are really good at that. Being proactive while the music is happening.
yeah,
Uh, I'm it's something that I'm constantly looking for, is finding musicians that you don't have to have those conversations with, that their
right, right,
instinct is already intact in a way that you align with.
yes,
Uh, I play in a band, I won't say which, um, but I play in a band that I've played in for a long time. We've got a new record coming out. Um, I'm pretty sure, there's gonna be some personnel changes.
mm,
Largely because of the instinct of one of the folks in the rhythm section.
yeah,
That instinct for where the solo is going and for where the energy of the song is going and all of those things is super important.
yeah,
And it's also important if you're the band leader that what that instinct is pointing towards, right?
right,
If their instinct is to go this way and yours is to go that way, you need new people.
yeah,
And we've all played gigs where we're in the middle of a solo and we're coming to the end of a chorus and we're about to start another chorus. And the instinct of the drummer is that we're done.
yeah,
And they make the energy go like this. And now you're screwed
yeah,
because there's nothing left for you to do. You can't, their energy the momentum and the energy of your solo has gone so far away from where you were trying to take it. You have no choice but to go, oh, I guess I'm done.
yeah,
And now someone else has chosen when you should stop your solo.
Right,
And
right,
I'm
yeah,
not down with that. That makes
yeah,
that you want to make me angry on a gig. This is how to do it.
yeah. Well, and
Right.
it's funny, I mean, a lot of these conversations aren't had, and that's kind of the frustrating thing. I mean,
Yeah. All
a
it
lot
takes
of
is
these,
5 minutes. Right.
yeah, I mean, our conversations on a gig or after the gig or whatever, but like when people are learning, I think it's really important now with a lot of students when they're just getting started. It's like, well, learn to play the melody. Here's the chord changes or maybe a pentatonic scale, and then play, go, and that's
Yeah.
kind of where a lot of it gets left. And that's the
Yeah.
unfortunate thing, because there's a lot more to the depth of listening and interaction than just that, than playing a good solo and just, you're just blinders on it and oblivious to everything else. Or
Yeah.
on the other side, the rhythm section, right? A rhythm, just play time or this and that, and then fill at the end of the chorus. It's like, well, there's a lot of other stuff.
Yeah. No. I that's the most frustrating thing for me is when I hear, and we've done them, we've done these gigs individually, we've done these gigs together where
Yeah.
we got done and I was like, man, I need you to get some different people because there's nothing happening going on behind. There's nothing happening behind us, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's just stuff happening. There's no
Right.
energy. There's no sense of direction. There's no
Right.
sense of interaction. There's no help. There's no
Right.
musical help. It's
Yeah.
just there. It's
Yeah.
just getting in the way and filling up the sound space, but it's not really helping you or me do our
Sure.
jobs. We could have gotten rid of either of the people that in the rhythm section and had an
Yeah.
easier time at the gig, even though it would have
Right.
been harder and more work, right?
Right.
It
Right.
would have still been more musical because of that. And I think that's that at the end of the day, that is the thing that we're trying to achieve, right? Our goal is good music.
Right.
I got into an argument with somebody about uh I was playing a gig and someone goes, "Oh, well, these guys don't really seem to care if it's very good." And I'm like, but that's our job.
Yeah.
Like in this room of 500 people, there are 8 of us that are getting paid here to play music, and we're the
Right.
ones that are supposed to care that it's
Right.
good.
Right.
So
Right.
so do care that it's good. Don't be, it doesn't mean you have a bad attitude and you're stressed out and you're wound up or any of those kinds of things. It's just that you care about it being good. When you make a mistake or it doesn't sound good, you go, "Hey, how can I make sure that doesn't happen again?" rather than just blowing it off and going, "Ha, that was funny."
Yeah.
And nobody cares and blah blah blah.
Right.
I think it's all the same with these little quartet performances that we do on Sundays. It's
Yeah.
equally frustrating for me to go back and watch them and go, "God, I'm trying to like come up with some stuff to play underneath the melody, and sometimes it wasn't successful. And I hate that I hear that, and I hate that
Yeah.
it's preserved forever as if it was a Carnegie Hall concert, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the fact is, that is the gig, and that is the job that we're trying to do. And so you do that. You try to go into that sense of, I'm going to try some stuff and it may not work, but
Yeah.
that's also the job. It's okay to try stuff and have it not work.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I remember studying with Liebman and having him say, look, if you're never making a mistake, then you're not really improvising. You're not
Yeah.
really trying to do anything that you
Yeah.
haven't done before.
Right.
So, put yourself out on a limb. Go walk out to the end of the plank, look over into the water, and then start playing.
Yeah.
And that always is a big thing to me. But there's also that line where that is exactly at odds with putting on a good show and making it
Yeah.
sound arranged and making it sound, like everything is planned and intentional and all that sort of thing.
Right.
So, which is also why, we talk a lot about, we have an hour long kind of sound check, but also let's get to know what we're doing and the approach and all that sort of stuff for the
Right.
concerts.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's always our most helpful time, even though it's 3 minutes a
Yeah.
song that we spend maybe
Yeah.
at most. It's enough for either you or me, whoever's bringing in the tune, to kind of go, "Hey, this is where this is coming from."
Right.
And in case there's not enough information on the paper, let me just tell you where I'm coming from.
Right.
And let's
Right.
just get that out of the way. And if it's not on the page, well, now you've got some new information.
Right.
But being the composer and arranger that I am, I want it on the page. I like putting it on the page. I feel
Yeah.
like the less we have to talk about all that stuff, the better.
Yeah.
And my favorite thing, you got right away where my new tune was coming from.
Right.
Like, and you said it on the mic. You're like, in the tradition of Burnout. And I was like, yep, you know what I'm talking about. Like, I didn't have to say that. I didn't have to say that to anybody. I didn't have to explain it. We played it for 3 minutes. We played like the head a little bit, and that was about it. And then we did it on the show, and that's how you introduced it. And I was like, okay, see, this is a conversation that you and I don't need to have,
Yeah.
right? Because those are records, those Branford Quartet records and the Winton records where the Burnout was a thing.
Yeah.
That's part of our musical DNA.
Yeah.
And I think as jazz musicians too, we assume that all of jazz music is part of all jazz musicians' DNA. And I think that's I have to remind myself, not everybody knows all music.
Yeah.
And so if that's true, then how do you communicate those things on the page? Because they need that context. You can't go, hey, here's 3 hours of Burnout tracks. Go
Yeah.
listen to this and then come play the show.
Yeah.
That's not feasible in the time that we have a lot of times. But to be able to go, yeah, it's time no changes, or it's this vibe, or it's modal, it's free modal, right? Any kind of terminology. I think I used all those terms for Jacques and Greg to just sort of
Yeah.
give it a sense of parameters that, yeah, there's changes on the page, but that's very open and loose. And especially since there's no piano player, no one's going to be
Right.
hearing all that anyway. It's really
Right.
pedals and that kind of thing. But bringing it back a little bit to how do we do these additional things on the fly?
Right.
It's a conversation that we have often on any gig, and that's, do you want to play the melody? You want to play the A's? You want to play the bridge? You want to trade eights on the melody? Like, just simple of things as that, I think,
Yeah.
set us up as players for just hearing an accompaniment when we
Right.
switch, right?
Yeah.
That you're already in the mode of playing a melody, and then when you default to sort of being in the background, it's still connected to what you just played. And so you're in this headspace of playing melodically, even if you aren't playing the melody.
Right.
Which I think is not, again, it's back to what is the circumstances of the tune.
Right.
But I feel like, as you look at a standard, for example, an AABA standard, or even like, how about Green Dolphin Street, where you have an ABAC form, a form where there's something that happens at the beginning of each of two 16-bar sections, but the end of those two 16-bar sections are different. These are my favorite kinds of tunes, because you've got a home, kind of this sense of, I'm at home on the A, and then I'm going away on the B, and then I come home again, and then I go to some other place, and then I come home again, and then I go back to B, and then I come home again and go to C. Well, that home that's the comforting part for the listener, right?
Right.
So if it's Green Dolphin Street, it's a great melody for nice harmonic notes, right? But B, that's our root of our chord. It could be there, right? It could be ba 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 B. It could be dee da. It could be on the major seventh. It could be on the ninth, right? You could do all kinds of stuff to harmonize that melody note. It
Yeah.
could be as simple as the melody player goes ba B. The other player plays a line over that. Ba
Yeah.
B dee ba 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 bi da ba bo dee ha ba ba ba. Beep boo wee ba ba, right? Like, there can
Yeah.
be this sense of like teeter-tottering more, in the same way that you might do an interplay with a vocalist.
Right.
I think this is maybe my favorite thing to try to do, is to imagine that I'm accompanying. I did this a lot when I was in my high school years and college. I listened to a lot of those Ella Fitzgerald songbook records,
Right.
the
Right.
Jerome Kern songbook. There's
Yep.
she did all of those, Gershwin, etc., Cole Porter, blah blah blah. And I would always try to pretend that it was me as the, in the Lester Young role for Billie Holiday, if you will, right?
Yep.
Like that I'm trying to compliment and not get in the way
Right.
what's happening with the melody, which, again, as tenor and trombone players, we're kind of lucky. we're in the male voice range, right?
Right.
By default, we're out of soprano and alto voice range. We're out of trumpet and alto range. We're by nature, there's some space between us and that register, which in and of itself creates all kinds of problems for you and me because you write all your melodies really low.
Yeah.
And so there's nowhere for me to harmonize that keeps you sounding like the melody,
Right.
right? Without
Right.
it. So we when we talked about this a little bit at the last gig, what did we do? On the ballad, we had you go up an octave, and now all of a sudden that second chorus of the melody had all kinds of extra opportunities for harmonizing that made sense.
Yeah.
Right. That instead of it being down here and close, now it's like this. And now it feels open and singing in the way that the tune needed to. Right.
Right. That
Otherwise,
reminds me, going
it would have
back
just
like
been
that.
like down and dragging and,
Yeah, but there's the what is it? Stan Getz and Kai Winding or JJ Johnson. I need to go back and check that out because I'm sure there's a lot of
which
different.
one? Yesterday's?
I can't remember. I know they've done a
Yeah.
couple different albums, but
Yeah, JJ and Stan at the Opera House is probably the most famous
that's the one
one
I'm thinking about. That's the one I'm
with the
thinking
Oscar Trio. Yeah. They do Yesterday's on there together. And that's like, I mean, that's the first jazz record I really listened to. So almost everything I intuitively think about from a two-horn tenor trombone perspective comes from that record.
Yeah.
And it's a masterwork in a lot of ways, especially the version of Yesterday's is, the most of that record is just real fun, fast, free blowing stuff. There's a fast blues called Blues in the Closet by Oscar Pettiford. They do Crazy Rhythm by George Gershwin. Billy's Bounce is on there. Then they each have a solo ballad. It Never Entered My Mind, and I can't remember
Right.
which one JJ does. And then they play Yesterday's together, kind of medium-esque. Booty, kind of right about in there.
Mm-hmm.
And hearing those guys play the whole beginning of the melody with no rhythm section and go back and forth between one guy playing the actual melody and one guy playing accompaniment and then back and forth. This to me is the textbook of how to do it.
Yeah.
It sounds free and improvised, but it also feels amazingly worked out. Like you can't imagine them playing other notes.
Right.
And as an experiment, in the original days that when this record came out on Verve, it was whatever, 6 tunes, 3 tunes aside. Well, when we entered the digital age, they put out a whole nother album worth of material on the CD version of this from another, because the concert was from the Jazz at the Opera House, live at the Jazz at the Opera House concerts.
Right.
And it was a tour. And so they put on another date from that same thing. And it's a stereo recording as opposed to a mono recording, which is what the album was in. I think the proper concert is in Chicago.
Was this a Norman Granz production?
Norman Granz, yeah. All for Verve. He is all his stuff. And they played the same set. Like exactly the same set. So you can actually go in and you can listen to what it sounds like to have these people at this high level do it on 2 different occasions and not just have it be this one version. I think that there aren't that many opportunities to hear kind of the scenario that we go through as players, that feels like a live jam session that's also a concert. That's kind of a unique thing, right?
Yeah.
When was the last time you played a gig that felt like that was your gig in a club?
Yeah. Not very often. Not very often. Yeah.
Yeah, you don't want it to sound that loose. Right? I think most of us would like it to feel more polished than whatever that looks like in our heads, right?
Right.
And so to find examples where it is actually like that are rare, but the Jazz at the Philharmonic recordings, and there's dozens and dozens of them. Dizzy Gillespie made a bunch with Cannonball's rhythm section that are amazing. The tour that's these guys, Stan, I think Diz was also on that tour, Stan and Diz and JJ and the Oscar Peterson trio. I think that's 59 or 60. They're so good because there you can hear them talking, and you can hear JJ go, "Oh, hey, let's do this one." Dop, 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 dop. And that's all he says. And then they start the
Yeah.
tune.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what he means, and they've played the tour and then off to the races.
Yeah.
I've always felt like that's way more important stuff to listen to and try to intuit the logic of than what 2/5 did the guy just play.
Right.
That's easy. That stuff's easy. That's just math. Anybody can learn that stuff.
Yeah.
But to really get in the mind of the logic of the intuitive mind of a jazz musician is tricky. It's like the So What solo for Miles Davis.
Yeah.
For decades, we've been teaching young students this is what to think because this is what Miles Davis was thinking, right? Well, we think that's what he was thinking. We're pretty sure that's what he was thinking. We can hear that's probably what he was thinking, but that is false. That is
Yeah.
patently false.
Yeah.
In fact, and I use this example often. If you don't have the book, The Making of Kind of Blue by Ashley Kahn, I can't recommend it enough. He's written a couple of books about making of great jazz records, but in that book is a photograph of the chord changes and scales for flamenco sketches. Okay. Yeah. And if you were to, maybe I've talked about this on one of our classes in the past. If I were to say the chord change is F7 sus, okay, 99 out of 100 people would say, oh, the scale you're supposed to play over that is the F mixolydian or the F dominant scale.
Yeah.
Right. Most jazz textbooks will tell you this. Most jazz instructors will tell you this. That's not what they were thinking. That's not what they played. And that's not what they were doing. You look at the sheet music, the chord change that Cannonball is looking at when it says F7 sus, or F mixolydian is the mode, the scale written on the page is the C Dorian scale. And yes, they're the same notes. They're the same 7 notes, but they are in a different order.
Yeah.
And by thinking one, you will get different results and different sounding results and different relationship to the chord and blah, 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 blah. You will also, it is highly unlikely that you will play an A in a strong way.
Right.
And that is the most important part, that the minute you start thinking I'm going to play F mixolydian over F sus, your brain and your practicing and your stuff you're going to play FGA. You're going to go da, da, da. You're going to play that.
Yeah.
And you don't want to do that on a sus chord. And that's part of why I think a lot of young players struggle with sus, because they don't have, it's the same scale, but don't play this one instead of don't play that one, is a lot harder to make happen than just play the 2 over the 5.
Right.
And now you'll get the sound that you want.
Right.
That's what they did. And that's what that's why they sound the way they do. So why aren't we teaching that?
Yeah.
Why don't we teach that? Because for 1,000 reasons. But at the end of the day, by teaching play F7, play F mixolydian scale over F7 sus, we are really doing a disservice to both the history and the way the music sounds. We are reinforcing not good sounds instead of good sounds, and all those sorts of things. So the homework part of harmony is so important. In a way, somebody asked me once, what do you get with a $100,000 jazz education?
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, the answer is a really expensive piece of paper.
Yeah.
And lots of theory.
Yeah.
We are generally, as jazz musicians, I believe that our progress, our process over time is dictated by our acquisition of harmony, whether that's techniques within simple harmony or just heady, higher level stuff. But it all comes down to that often what differentiates a beginning player and an intermediate player and an advanced player is their chord scale knowledge, right? That when we think of beginning players, we think of they really only know the major scale and the dominant scale and maybe the blues scale, and maybe a minor scale. When we think of intermediate young students, maybe they've dealt with some melodic minor modes. Maybe they know some pentatonics. Maybe they know a bebop scale, right? And then we think of advanced players. We're thinking of hexatonics. We're thinking of triad pairs. We're talking about altered scales. We're talking about anything with extensions on a dominant chord. We're talking about harmonic major. We're talking about, right? This is what differentiates us. Not how fast you can play, not how high you can play, none of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
So to me, all I'm trying to do on any given tune is help emphasize that sense of the harmony.
Yeah.
Right. So my harmonic knowledge, my ability to get from chord to chord, my chord, what's the word I'm looking for? My voice leading is
Yeah.
so important. And also my ability to see that on the page while looking at the melody
Yeah.
and being able to process that melody as what I'm not going to play and now calculate what I'm going to play. That
Right.
takes some practice. Like that's not something that you just want to do on the fly.
Right.
One of the very first things I think that the Aebersold play along books recommend you do is just play all the roots of all the chords in
Yeah.
time, and then play all the thirds of all the chords in time, and then all the fifths, and then all the sevenths. And now try doing it where you go root of one chord to the third of the next chord, to the root to the third, and then the third to the fifth. And right, you could just keep doing
Right.
this all day. It's a super valuable thing to do.
Yeah.
Because the minute you one I love to do is pick a note to start on and then just always move to the next closest note.
Yeah.
So if it's all the things you are, we'll just short mental exercise. If it's all the things you are, pick a note to start on.
You asking me right now?
Yeah. Any
Okay.
note in an F minor 7.
Yeah. Let's go E flat.
Okay, so E flat. Our next change is B flat minor 7. So we could go from the E flat to the D flat, or we could go from the E flat up to the F, and those would make logical sense.
Right.
Our next change is the E flat 7. So, well, I could stay on that F, I could stay on that D flat, or I could keep moving.
Yeah.
Again, this exercise is even just with whole notes, even just with whatever the length of the chord is such a great practice tool, not just for accompanying, but for being a better soloist, because now there is a sense of voice leading to the changes.
Right. And you can also come up with creative ways to comp using that line.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm glad you talked about this and brought this up, because I wanted to ask you, a lot of times, you mentioned guide tones, and usually the Windows default explanation is thirds and sevenths. But then when you listen to guys like, Jerry Mulligan or Chet Baker, or any of those cool guys, cool jazz.
School,
yeah, and all those different pairings. There's tons of albums, but you hear them playing things underneath, and they'll start with simple stuff, but then they'll move and they'll do exactly what you're talking about. They'll move like any note of the scale can be a chord tone or guide tone line, as long as it makes sense and it's rhythmically solid. And they do that all day long. And it almost sounds on some of these things, I've brought this up before. It's like the one that I always go to, it's Two of a Mind, Jerry Mulligan and Paul Desmond. And it almost sounds like classical music that swings, like a Bach 2-part invention, how they move that.
Lots of counterpoint and linearity, and it does feel like a Bach 2-part invention. Same with like Lee Konitz and Warren Marsh. Those recordings to me feel a lot like that. But where counter lines as opposed to guide tones, I think are super. Lee Konitz really puts this out there early on in kind of his teaching kind of stuff. There's a great article from the 80s that he did called, I think it's called The 10 Steps to Improvising. And it's the example, the article has the first 8 bars of All the Things You Are. And it's basically a theme in variations. Number 1 is ba da 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 da. Number 2 is ba bo da bo do da dee do dee da da bo da bo do bo dee da. Right, it's still in there, but we're ornamenting. And then number 3 is a little more da ba do ba da ba dee dee be dee ba da ba do ba da, right? A little more scalar, but with all of
Yeah.
those ornamentations. And then it continues and continues and continues until it's like step 9 or 10 or whatever the last step is like just says improvise over the music staff paper. No written out notes anymore.
Right.
So I think that that's also really helpful from a practice perspective. When it's changes that you are practicing and working on because it's a tune that you like or prepping to play on a concert. This is the sort of things that I practice. I don't really ever practice playing a solo on a set of changes anymore.
Yeah.
In that way, where I put a neighbor salt on and go like, I'm going to pretend I'm in Carnegie Hall and playing a concert. I don't really do that so much. What I
Right.
do practice is if I'm going to play Getting Better and it's Beatrice, I'm going to do exactly the kinds of things we're talking about. I'm going to play some scalar ideas where I just play through the changes up and down, and I just not without any sense of like really trying to play melodies, just trying to play melodically in a very kind of pedantic isn't the right word, but in a simple way, in a way that isn't too tricky, that is really just about letting my ears take in the sound of the harmony from as many different places as possible.
Right.
I know I always do better when I can hear what's happening in my inner ear, like sing along with the song. If I can do that, then I can figure out where to get to. If I can't do that, then I'm relying more on my brain to tell me what to play. And I don't like doing that as much. I'm good at that. I feel like I'm actually better at the thinking part. And that's what held me up as a young player, is I relied on my thinking and not using my ears.
Yeah.
And somewhere in my 20s, Jigs Wiggum was like, "You're not really listening to what you're playing very much, are you?" And I was like, "No." He's like, try doing this, and it changed everything for me to where I was like, oh, I'm now an anti-thinker. I don't want to I don't want to think. I just want to hear and play what I'm hearing.
Right.
And then I went back to school and did my master's and doctorate, and all that it's all thinking. It's all thinking.
Yeah.
So I'm finding myself back in a place where I want to be more of the anti-thinking, even though I have more things to think about, and and more time for it to settle in. I mean, I'm almost 50 now, so like I've had a lot of time for those thinking things to stick and move from being something that's intentional and thought about when I practice to something that's intuitive and natural and just happens and comes out. That is why we practice, right? We practice so that something that we put into our playing with specificity and intention and all that doesn't come out that way in the future,
right?
So that it comes out as if we're saying it for the first time and we improvised it,
Yeah.
Which is not an easy task, right? We've all heard players where they go, oh, they just put in their thing, they just played their lick, they just figure out the place to insert it and they just stuck it in. And which is not a bad thing to do. It's just when we can tell that you're doing it, you just didn't do it very good.
Right. Exactly. Well, I think this is a good place to stop for today. So we've had listeners kind of going in and out here. So if anybody has any questions about anything we've covered today, feel free to put stuff in the comments either on YouTube or on Facebook after the fact. We will be doing more of these. So if you have anything that you would like us to cover or have questions about, feel free to let us know that too. We're happy to help. And again, thank you to all of our sponsors for making these series and interviews and concerts possible. And of course, that's KNKX, Ted Brown Music, Titus Will Cars, Tacoma Creates, and Edward Jones Financial Consultant Rick Gray. Our next concert coming up is going to be this coming Sunday at McMinimans in Tacoma with special guest Alex Gilbert, great pianist. So that'll be a lot of fun, and of course, brand new music. So thanks for joining us, and hope to see you again soon. Talk to you later.